Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things with you again today. And I've got Myriam Hadnes with me. How are you, Myriam?
I'm good. Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And team, if you're listening to this today, the reason I'm having Myriam on is because she is an amazing facilitator. And we want to talk a lot about facilitation today. So I'm just warning about that. Before we get into that, though, remember, if you want to stay connected to us and learn more about our community, you can join us on Discord on the Discord server and check out our latest blogs, articles, whatever that may be. We'll be happy to see you there. You'll find that in the links below. You can get that by going to remoteaf.co and just clicking on the community button. So that'll be fantastic. That being said, Myriam, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more to the crew?
Sure. Maybe just a few words about me and how I came to facilitation.
Fantastic.
I initially had a life and career in higher education. I have a PhD in behavioral economics, run away from academia and the public sector, came to Amsterdam to redefine my life, and stumbled into facilitation. And when the pandemic hit, I started a community never done before, which is a community of facilitators that was born out of basically my boredom from conferences, that it was always same old, and playing it safe. And I'm hosting a podcast myself, the Workshops Work podcast, all about facilitation, 220 episodes now. So yes, I can geek out on facilitation, and I'm looking forward to do this with you today.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And geek out we will, I think, because, in my role I like to say I'm in my third decade of doing this stuff, facilitation's been sort of a key player. And I like to think that I like to keep learning. In facilitation, you never really not learn, because every time you do a different situation, you find something new.
Yes. And there's the one thing, and we briefly talked about in when we just warmed up, is the inner game of facilitation and our self-awareness, and how we deal with ourselves as the one thing that we never really master.
That is
So
so true. It is so
facilitation keeps being a practice.
Yeah. So let's start with facilitation, because I'm really interested. Um, there's lots of different facilitation techniques, and there's lots of different facilitation and what people call facilitation. What's your version? What is facilitation?
Mm. Facilitation for me goes beyond the methods and the activities. So facilitation is, and it goes beyond hosting better meetings. It's almost a mindset, I would say. It's a way how we approach interactions, collaboration, even how we approach ourselves, I would say. So the facilitator's mindset is asking curious questions, is the facilitator believes that the group knows it already. And we're just there to facilitate the conversation, to make it easier for them to have the brilliant ideas and to find solutions and to work better together.
Now that sounds really easy. So why is it not so easy? Because I've been in many of these, as you probably have, and there's a thing that I always say when I talk to facilitators is you're actually meant to not be the person. You're meant to be the person that allows the people in the room to be the persons, right? But why is it so hard?
I think there's several reasons. One is, and I think of this as a first, because you mentioned to be the person who's not the person. So the first is ego. It is so easy to get carried away. We prepared the workshop plan or the agenda for a group. We fall in love with our activities, our methods. We have our ideas that we want to bring across. But then once we step into the space, it's not about us. And I think I heard it from several podcast guests, and I really love that the biggest compliment for a facilitator is when the group, by the end of the day or the session, says, "Oh, that was easy. Why did we even hire this facilitator?" Right? They didn't do anything. So I think to become this almost invisible person, because you poke the group, you guide them through a process that almost remains invisible for them. And I think to have the mastery And the humility at the same time, that's really difficult. And then on top of that comes obviously the group dynamics. There's always the person in the room who is a little bit more dominant than others. There's always the person in the room who doesn't like to speak up. There's always, when you work with clients, the elephant in the room that nobody wants to speak about, but is actually the task of the facilitator to be courageous enough to point out. So all these small things. And last but not least, maybe the biggest entry barrier to have a successful facilitated session is that usually the reason why we are called in, that we're hired, is not the reason why the work really needs to be done. So the client wants, just a strategy session, but what they actually need is some deep team building because they have a toxic culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always like peeling away the layers of onions. I sometimes think when you peel away that layer, there is a few tears and a few lumps and bumps, and then you peel it away and it's a little bit more. And it's never easy, right? And I think that being honest to the group at the beginning of it is part of it, to say this could be challenging today. This could be quite strong. And getting their agreement to it. So that's something I wanted to ask you about, is what I see is a lot of facilitators don't get people to agree to be facilitated. On that?
That's interesting. I heard about the concept of not being coachable.
Yeah.
But I totally see, because for coaching, for me, it really goes into the inner world of the participants or the people. I think the only ones that I encounter as not wanting to be facilitated, but that happens unconsciously, are facilitators. I think facilitating facilitators is like herding cats.
Yeah, well, I've seen it a few times, but not a great. But I found, and I have found that was quite challenging for me. And quite often you're right, it's facilitators, but they might be a leader who's been a facilitator, or someone in the room who just really does not want to be there, right? So,
yeah, true. I think if they don't buy in with the process, if they don't trust the facilitator, or if I think it mostly comes from either uncertainty or even insecurity. Oh, where's this person leading us, and how much do I have to reveal about myself? And I think many facilitators still have the kind of negative connotation of being these woo-woo people who throw post-it notes on the walls and ask everyone how they are doing, and to speak about their feelings while sitting in a circle and singing Kumbaya. And I think that the role of a facilitator has really changed. And hopefully the perception, but I think the perception still has to catch up. So I worked with clients where, the hippo, the highest paid person in the room, would, with the first exercise, where it's basically just turn to your neighbor and say hello, but they would scream out and say, no, 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 we don't want to go there. We don't want this touchy-feely stuff. It's a nice challenge.
Flag, isn't it? And there's something definitely deep going on. I guess that leads. It's a good segue. It leads me to the other question, and that other question really is about. Okay, so when you do get to that point, it's about, and I know you're very passionate about it, it's asking the right questions. So talk about your thoughts on that, because I know you're very passionate about asking the right questions.
Yes. So for me, it feels as if our way of asking questions got stuck in the industrial age, where we had to go somewhere in order to get knowledge. So there was an effort, there was searching cost involved in finding information. So we had to ask questions in order to find information, in order to get information. Whereas today, every piece of information is basically just a Google search away or a ChatGPT search away. It's so easy to access just an answer to a question. So I think the reason why we are really should, and I rarely use the word should, be asking questions when we are synchronously together at the same time in the same space is to learn about other people's perspective and other people's reality, and not just about information, because that's basically a waste of all of our time and energy. And so that's one thing, that I think we're wasting too much time just asking for information, and thereby also lose the connection and the opportunity to be with each other and to learn from each other. And the other layer is that questions can be weapons, and questions can be gifts. And I think very often, consciously or not, we're using questions as weapons. So for instance, the famous why questions, they can hurt. They go to identity. They go directly into our belief system. And very often we don't mean it in a bad way. It's just the way, oh, coaches ask why questions. So why are you late? What happened for you to be late? Interesting. So the why questions, there's one answer to the why question. To any other questions, the how come, the what if, the how might we, there's an entire story opening up, an entire investigation, an opportunity to really connect, to understand what's really going on. And that for me is a gift. So for me, I ask a question. If I ask the right question, I'm offering a gift to my partner, because I give them the opportunity to investigate inside themselves what's going on and then share it with me.
It's about creating the right space as well, I think, listening to you. One of the things that I often see facilitators do, which I particularly don't like, is that they take the space away. They've got their agenda and they don't leave space in the agenda for the story to play out. As you said, all right, we know that as facilitators, we do have to directionally guide, much like I'm guiding this cast. But there is a point there where you need to be able to understand that information flowing through. How do you take that into account? What are the things that you watch for?
First, I want to acknowledge that it is very difficult, especially online, where we send the groups off into breakouts, usually, to have the real conversations. And we sit there and wait. So time for us elapses much slower than for those who are doing something in the breakouts. And we don't know what's happening there. So it always seems like enough time for us and waste too little time for them, until it becomes too much time. And then it's dangerous, because then we lose them. They get distracted. So I think with Zoom now, the beauty is that you have the option to see the activity in the breakout rooms. Yeah. So you see whether people are speaking and who is speaking and who is not and how much. So I think this gives you an idea of, is there lots of content? And then I would rather start short and see how the group feels and whether they complain, whether there's too little time, and then expand, give them more time as we move through the session. Because, yeah, there's this law, I forgot the name and it will come back to me, that says that any task takes as much time as it is given. And it's similar with conversation. So if you give too much time, yes, it's nice to really explore, but are they exploring the right things, or are they going on to a tangent? And I think that's also the high art of facilitation, to give just enough time, unless it is, yes, it's difficult. And I think it's a mix of gut feel and experience, and it depends on the topic. What's your perspective on that?
I agree with you. I think listening for space is the other thing too, is that interestingly enough, in remote, it becomes a different thing, isn't it? And so you have to pick up on a lot of the verbal cues more. So your listening becomes more important. And a lot of people don't realize that good facilitation is actually about listening. Yes, there's the body language and there's the tension in the room, but all of that folds into nothing if you can't listen. And when you're in remote, I think listening becomes that powerful skill to be able to listen and process.
Yes. And listening to the different sounds of silence. I find this fascinating, and I don't know where it comes from, but it feels as if you can hear whether it's a silence of confusion, whether it's a silence of reflection, whether it's a silence of of almost tension and discomfort.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece, isn't it? And I think it's a skill that it goes to probably the other question I sort of had that I was going to talk to you about was, and what you're saying there sort of folds into when I first approached you to be on the cast. You came back to me and said on LinkedIn, you came back to me and said, yes, but tell me about your thoughts on facilitation. Why you and you questioned me on that, and I gave you an answer in self-talk, saying, well, this is what goes on in my head. And I was watching something that you were doing, and it was like making my self-talk go backwards and forwards. But it's an interesting thing is let's talk. And you prefaced it just a little bit before. It was a little bit about that, self-talk. When you've been facilitating a long time, there's a lot of stuff going on in the head, but you don't want everybody out there to understand what's going on. What's your thoughts on that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the self-management. How to deal with that? I think it's a mix between self-compassion and confidence. So what I see happening, and I think we all have that in common, that's why I think facilitation starts with self-leadership and self-awareness, because there's always something going on in our mind. And the more we are exposed to other people, the more potential triggers there are. And very often there's this one participant who says something and it sounds as if it was our dad, and we're thrown back to our high school or early childhood times, and flip, we snap and become this person. And I think the role of a facilitator is to get faster in realizing what's going on, that this is our trigger, which has nothing to do with this person, and it's all about us. And given that it's about us, we can just inhale, exhale, and relax. And I think that is a skill that we have to grow. It doesn't come naturally. And this is also, and that's maybe then the bridge to your very first question, why I believe that facilitation is actually a life skill. If we are good facilitators in the space, we are wonderful friends, we are maybe even better parents, better spouses, because we have this ability to just pause for a second and be self-aware enough when we get triggered, because it's us and not them.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the children thing, then there's that thing where you say something that sounds like your parents, and that fires off a whole bunch of things as well. But essentially, yeah, I think you're right. And there's a lots of different triggers. And when I talk about that self-talk, I was talking to you about that self-talk. The other thing about that is that there's all these tools, plan A, plan B tool, etc. Right? And it's about how you change gears and you change those tools into how you want to do what you need to do. And I think that's something that you actually have to learn. What's your thoughts on that? Because you obviously do a lot of this.
Yeah, and what I hear in what you're saying is then also the doubt. I could have used the different tool. I should have done that. I could have given them more time. So this kind of self-talk, of self-doubt. Yes. So that's, I think, where self-compassion comes in, that the group never knows what you didn't say and what you didn't do. And I guess that they they assume, in general, they assume that you have thought of the process and that there is structure to it. So I think we can relax a little bit and just think it's good enough. On the other hand, I think that, and this has to do with psychological safety. So we, as facilitators, one of our big tasks is to create psychological safety. This means where the group can feel free to ask questions, take space without the fear of being judged or criticized or put down. In order to create psychological safety for others, I think we first need to create it for ourselves. Because if I don't feel secure and if I don't feel safe, then it will translate to the group. Because they will hear it they might not trust my guidance if I don't trust it. And the way how I react to any question or any criticism, if I'm not secure, is again the snapping. Because then I'm like, maybe now they will find out that actually I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think if we do have this, if we feel safe enough, then we also feel safe to say, oh, maybe this activity wasn't the best. Let me try something else. And then it's okay. And the group will actually appreciate that. And we'll introduce them differently. Yeah. In general, though, long story short, I think for me, I came back to very minimalistic designs. We don't need much to go deep and to do the work. So I think most of the tools and the gimmicks and the activities are distractions.
Yeah, the most simplistic methods actually get more results I've found over the many years. So I really gravitate to that answer because, the more, and the reality is, if you're watching this and you've just started facilitating, the more complicated you make it harder for yourself to facilitate the people through the process, let alone them get through the process, right? And if you're having a hard time getting them through it, then it really reflects back through the people, which is what you were saying before. So I think that's really good. What that leads me to, though, is another question for you, an interesting one. You mentioned at the top of the show, it was called Never Done Before. And so you really do treat facilitation as if I say it, an art form, and thinking about how that we can get better at, how we can research it. And literally, the longer you do it, the more you learn. And as I said at the top of the show, also, you never stop learning. So talk to me a little bit about Never Done Before, because that's, you call it, and I'm just going to read it off the thing so I get it exactly right. You call it the Facilitators Research and Development Department. So talk to me about how that's different to just going to a typical coaching thing where we'll teach you how to do facilitation.
Yeah, that's maybe the first thing. So I'd never done before. We all learn, but nobody teaches. And so we have a few community agreements where we say that we acknowledge that the wisdom is in the room, and the condition that we have for the workshops we run in the community is that they have to be done in the way or form that we as a facilitators have never done before. Which doesn't mean that we are testing new tools or tech for the first time, because that's destructive. But that we're looking at the edges of facilitation. So for instance, we had one colleague, Dov Zal, he did a workshop, 90 minutes in total silence, just to see how can we collaborate if we don't talk to each other. And tomorrow I will host a workshop that I called Facilitators Anonymous, where everyone joins with camera off and renaming themselves in XYZ. So we don't know who's talking and who's using the chat. So how will it change the dynamic of a conversation if actually we don't know the identity, and if we know that our identity cannot be revealed? And I think at its core, and that's why it's a research and development department, that's this year's theme. Last year we were at the greenhouse. So is because if a newbie facilitator would come to our workshops and say, this is how it's done, we would go, no, 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 no. This is not what we would do with clients. We're basically testing the edges and see if we're bringing our activities and the things to the extreme, what might happen. So we're running twice per year events, and they're always for 24 hours to cover the entire globe. And in a recent workshop, we played around with activities that we all know very well, and how can we tweak them, or how can we mix them with another activity to make a new one out of it. And we realized that we could run an entire day full of variations of the Troika consulting activity. So one community member, she challenged us and said, why don't we do a Troikathlon?
Right.
So 24 hours of the Troika in different variations, and then just see what happens. So I think and the beauty of it is that, and I can speak for myself and for the community, over the 3 years of existence of Never Done Before, I just grew the muscle to constantly see new themes or new opportunities for a Never Done Before workshop, just out of curiosity. Oh, let's see what happens. And the other one is observing some beginner facilitators in the community who started a year ago, and they were mature as persons, but didn't have a lot of facilitation experience under their belt. And I would confidently call them now facilitators, and I'm sure that they facilitate better than many who went through a proper facilitation training and certification, just because they practiced, they observed, and they were in constant conversation with other facilitators.
I want to pick up on something you said there, because facilitation is like a muscle. And I heard you refer to it a little bit there. And it's a bit like working out in the gym. You've got to keep doing it to keep growing it and keep that muscle moving as well. So if you don't facilitate, then how can you find ways to facilitate to keep going when you're not facilitating? Speak, right?
Precisely. And I think one thing that is really underestimated is to participate. Because only if we're in the seat of a participant, we actually feel the discomfort of doing something new. We realize how short the time in the breakout room is. We realize that we never really focus on the instructions, and we always end up in a breakout room asking, so what are we supposed to do? And these small things will make us better facilitators, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that in doing that, when you're in there as well, and you have somebody facilitating you, is the interminable start of facilitation is the thing that I think is an interesting art, and we probably just enough time to touch on that, is the icebreaker. And everybody wants to have an icebreaker. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that technique.
I heard it first time from Jan Keck, who calls it the ice melter, because he says nobody wants to break the ice in the beginning. That sounds brutal. And recently a colleague asked me what my most playful activity was, and I realized I'm not really a playful facilitator. So I do the same beginning of a workshop always, every time. And I call it the turn to your neighbor moment. As if we were in the physical space, take a seat, and then what would be the first natural thing to do? You turn to your neighbor and you say hello. So everyone goes off in one by ones, say hello, and I usually give them a question that they can answer or not. And then when they come back, they all use their vocal cords, they feel less alone, there is a sense of belonging and meaning, and then we can start.
Yeah, that's great. It's the one thing, isn't it, when, as a facilitator, the minute you go, oh, we're going to do a bit of an icebreaker, you can feel the energy in the room, or you can see, the cringe, so it's coming up with something that's not
lock out
greatly. And I think that's the one that I continue to learn. And There's one that we use, particularly a remote AF, which is like a baseball card, which we, and basically Story Me, it's called. It allows them to take some time, because it's done in remote. It allows them to talk about work me, home me, fun me, etc. And then they can share as little or as much as they like, but then they can share that. And the results of that is people get to learn things about them that they never did before. You can see the cross synapses. And when they walk away from it, actually, what we've heard from people is it's created things where in the team do, oh, you like fishing. We can have a conversation on fishing now. So that's an interesting.
So would you let them really create the card? So you use a mural board?
Yeah, we have a mural type, and then they can fill it
template.
in blank, but they can fill it in. Yeah. So, but it's
Beautiful.
Yeah, interesting. I like the technique you've just talked about as well. So you're always picking up these things as you go, right?
Yeah, and what I like about yours is that it's also introvert friendly. So you give them a little bit of time. You don't throw them into the water, and whatever has happened in their life before entering your space, you give them a moment to just arrive, do their thing as quickly or slowly as they want, and then only interact with others.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's interesting to see. And, you do have to, of course, then have the premise around share as much or as little or as less as you like, because you need to give them that like you said, the psychological safety. Again, this is part of that balance.
Yeah.
Myriam, this has been fantastic, but we're really close to the end of our time, unfortunately. What I would like to ask you is how can people get in touch with you? How can people get in touch and be involved in Never Done Before? What's the way they can touch base with you?
So I think the easiest way is on LinkedIn, Myriam Hadnes. I am quite active, post about Never Done Before and about the podcast and my own thoughts. And otherwise, it's neverdonebefore.org in one word.
Brilliant. You'll find those in the show notes below. So it's been fantastic having you on all the remote things today. If you're listening to this, don't forget, as I said, join the Remote AF community, remoteaf.co. Click the button and you'll find our Discord community. Come join us and you'll find many of these kind of conversations going on. Myriam, it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony. It was bliss, and I hope that we can continue the conversation on my podcast.
Brilliant.